Welcome to the Cedar Lakes Conservation Foundation History Talk. You already know my name. Tonight, my cousin Bill Kasten and I ask you to join us as we walk through the stone pillars marking the entrance to Echo Point on Big Cedar Lake. Our trip will take us through 6 generations of the Jenner, Heineman, Kasten, and Smith families that have enjoyed Cedar Lake at Echo Point, and as it was initially known, Heineman's Point, since the late 1800s. The story of Echo Point actually starts centuries ago. Big Cedar Lake and Echo Point were created over 12,000 years ago during the Wisconsin glaciation period, when the Green Bay and Lake Michigan lobes collided in the southeastern Wisconsin. The collision created the Kettle Moraine and Big Cedar Lake, which is unique among the Kettle Moraine lakes because of the lobes of the glacier pushed up the moraine ridges around a pre-existing valley, resulting in the lake's 105-foot depth. Echo Point was carved by these glaciers, and at this point, eroded lake currents created the beach area and the shallow water just south of the point, an area known for years as Pebbly Beach. Moving on to the more recent past, really not that recent, but our story starts with Johann Thomas Jenner and Anna Marie Casti. Johann was born May 6, 1820, just north of Stuttgart, Germany. We don't know why he came to America, but he ended up in Schleisingerville, where he was in the tanning business. He may have also been a blacksmith and a railroad agent. Of course, we now know Schleisingerville to be Slinger. Anna Marie Casti was born January 6, 1821, in Switzerland. She came to America in 1837, when she was 16 years old. She came on a sailing schooner with her sister and brother-in-law, and the crossing took 3.5 months. Close your eyes and imagine life on that schooner. The food, the living condition, and the fear. Anna Marie settled in Schleisingerville, where she eventually met Johann Thomas Jenner. Thomas Jenner, as he was called, married Anna Marie Casti on June 5th, 1848. He was 28 years old and she was 27 when they married. They had 5 children, but one died at the age of 10. According to the 1860 census, Thomas and his family were living in Schleisingerville in the post office. Oops, I lost my place. Through the Civil War, it is believed that Thomas was the postmaster. We also believe that Anna Marie succeeded him as the postmistress of Schleisingerville. Thomas is not listed on the 1870 census, so he is presumed to have died before his 50th birthday. And that one house is still in Slinger today, the post office. Little down from Jim's Bakery. Thomas and Anna Marie's daughter, Anna Regina Jenner, married George Heineman on May 25th, 1867. At the time of their marriage, George was nearly 28, while Anna Regina had just turned 18. According to family lore, Anna's parents were not too happy with the match between their daughter and George. They were upset. They considered him to be a recent immigrant, a poor traveling salesman, a fur trader with the Indians, and since he was 10 years older than their daughter, they thought he looked kind of like her grandfather. And they questioned his ability to provide for a family. But whoa, they were so wrong. George Heineman turned out to be incredibly successful. He was a wholesale dealer in furs, hats, and straw goods. By the time they married, he had already established the George H. Heineman and Company in Milwaukee. After their marriage, George Heineman and Anna Regina Heineman moved to Milwaukee. According to documents from the time, George owned real estate worth $7,000 and had over $4,000 in personal assets. This is equivalent to about $264,000 today. George Heineman and Company ultimately became known as National Straw Works Company. Note that on this invoice, David Jenner, Anna Regina's brother, is also listed on the letterhead as working at the company. George and Anna Regina Heineman ultimately had 4 daughters and a son. From left to right, they are Matilda, Tilly, as she was called, Albert, Anita, Emma, and Elsa. Tilly on the left is Cindy and John Kasten's great-grandmother. Anita, the youngest in the middle, is the grandmother of Bill and me, and is also my namesake. Note the sour looks in the photograph. That is because the photographer made them spit out their gum before taking the picture. George Heineman was eventually successful enough to be able to buy the vacation property near his wife's birthplace in Slinger. On March 10th, 1886, he purchased what is now called Echo Point from Frank Siller for $1,600. What a bargain. Or about $50,000 in today's dollars. Still a bargain. Frank Siller had previously acquired the Echo Point property from Matthias and Margaretha Timmer. On this map, Echo Point is circled in red. On the screen, you see a copy of a newspaper article talking about the sale, as well as a photo of the original deed to George Heineman. Interestingly, the newspaper article from April 22nd, 1866 also states that, and I quote, "Other parties designed erecting cottages on the banks of the lake, wherein to spend the summer, and the indications are now that the number of campers will be greater than ever. Cedar Lake is coming to the front and in time will be one of the most popular summer resorts in the state." End of quote. This is such weird wording I can barely read it, but they were very right. As a result of this purchase, the property became known as Heineman's Point. It totals approximately 6.94 acres. To celebrate the purchase, the family story is that George Heineman put up tents on the end of the point, complete with plenty of booze and cigars for all his male friends. I don't know if the women stayed in the Fieldstone house or maybe they stayed at Timmer's. I don't know. The oil painting behind me on the mantle depicts Echo Point as it existed around 1890 when the picture was painted. The picture was painted by a traveling artist named Sade. He traveled around the lake, and for room and board, he painted pictures. So he probably stayed in the Echo Point garage rooms. And this picture we're lucky to have because my father's third wife put it in the garbage. She did. At the same time that he bought the land on Big Cedar Lake, George Heineman was also building a Victorian Queen Anne house located at 1672 North Prospect Avenue in Milwaukee. The house was designed by well-known architect Henry C. Cook at a cost of $25,000, or $771,000 in today's money. It was completed in 1887. In fact, Henry Cook wasn't just any architect. He went on to design the Pfister Hotel in 1893 and the Milwaukee City Hall in 1895. But back to Big Cedar Lake. When George Heineman purchased Echo Point, there was a small fieldstone cottage on the property. We think it was built by the previous owner, Frank Siller. The fieldstone house is still there and still in use on Echo Point today. In fact, the main Kasten house was added on to the original fieldstone cottage. It still has the original steep steps inside, going upstairs to 2 bedrooms. It is so steep it's like climbing a ladder. The Heinemans were an extended family. Even George's mother-in-law, Anna Marie Cassidy Jenner, along with many of their relatives, often visited and stayed at the house, enjoying the summertime beauty of the lake. The baby in the picture on the right is my mother. In fact, Anna Marie Cassidy Jenner was the one who encouraged George and Anna Regina Heineman to buy Echo Point. Many years earlier, she had traded with the local Indians living on the point and thought it was one of the most beautiful places on Cedar Lake. She is pictured here in the garden in 1905, and she passed away at the age of 95. She and Johann Thomas Jenner were Bill and my great-great-grandparents. The Heineman family usually moved from Milwaukee to Heineman's Point for the entire summer. You went for the whole summer because the trip from Milwaukee to the lake was a grueling one, often taking an entire day by horse and buggy. It was especially difficult for the heavy wagons to maneuver the primitive roads in Washington County. At one point, along Old Highway 41, now Highway 175, the steep hill called Meeker Hill, the entire family had to get out of the wagon and push to get it up. As you can imagine, once at the lake for the season, the family swam, prepared large family meals, and sailed. George Heineman's son, Albert, was one of the first men on the lake to own a sailboat. The sailboat was named Anita. The first sailboat race that we know of on Cedar Lake was held on September 12th, 1897. 27-year-old Albert sailed the Cyclone for hotel proprietor Adolf Rosenheimer, the Cyclone's owner. The other boat in the race was Bloomer Girl, sailed by Gustav Kuchenmeister. Wooden kegs served as the buoys for the race. The start was initiated from Oak Lodge by an old double-barreled shotgun, kept in the family of a lake resident since the French Revolution. The race was never close. Bloomer Girl finished a good 20 minutes ahead of Cyclone. Sailing was catching on in the area in the spring of 1899. Gustav Kuchenmeier, S.F. Meyer, Albert Heineman, and Fred Sprinkman began to talk up the need for a local organization, a club to promote sailing. A meeting was arranged on April 29th, 1899, at the Deutscher Club in Milwaukee, now known as the Wisconsin Club. The Constitution and bylaws for the Cedar Lake Yacht Club were created. The officers and members were elected for the new club. Gustav Kuchenmeier was Commodore, and Albert Heineman was Vice Commodore. I think I'm killing the pronunciation of his name. The yacht club had no meeting place in the early years, and occasionally the Commodore and Sailing Committee used the veranda around the second floor of the stone structure at the Rosenheimers Resort, which is where the resort stored its kegs of beer. The structure later became the actual CLYC clubhouse, and after many remodelings is still part of the current structure. By May 1901, Heineman's Point started being called Echo Point. And, do any of you know why? It is because the echo of the gun being fired for the start of the sailboat race at Oak Lodge Resort on the north side echoed off the point. So we became Echo Point. In 1900, Albert Heineman attended the St. Louis World's Fair and returned to Cedar Lake with an exciting new boat, a steam-powered launch, that was 28 feet long, complete with brass fixtures and a colorful overhead canopy. The boat was originally named Anita, but eventually came to be called the Lady of the Lake. As the Heineman children grew, so did the size of the family group at Cedar Lake, so more space was needed. Additional rooms and a second floor were added to the original fieldstone house. According to an article in the West Bend Pilot on April 22, 1903, Herman Esser was the architect of the Kasten house. He was also the architect for the entrance portico at Jesu Church, as well as designing the colonnade on Gimbel Brothers department store in downtown Milwaukee. Emma, Elsa, and Anita Heineman and their families continue to live in the newly remodeled Kasten house. Around the same time, a new house was built on the southwestern side of Echo Point. One of George and Anna Regina Heineman's daughters, Matilda, or Tilly, and her husband, Charlie Groff, moved into this house. And as I've said, these, Charlie and Tilly, are John and Cindy's great-grandparents. This home has a wonderful screen porch on the back side of the house, screens on 3 sides. When I was growing up, every Sunday afternoon after the races, Renee von Schleinitz, Walter and Fred Kasten, Wally and Ernie Sprinkman, and Armand Schultz would play sheep's head and drink martinis all afternoon on that porch. It became very boisterous. The wonderful part is, though, that they could all walk home when they were finished. On August 3rd, 1906, George Heineman died at his home on Cedar Lake. He was 67 years old and had just retired from the National Straw Hat Works. It was the year before. His son Elbert succeeded him at the firm. Now I want to talk a bit about my family and growing up on Echo Point. As I mentioned earlier, George and Anna Regina Heineman had 5 children. Their youngest daughter, Anita, was my grandmother and namesake. Anita grew up at Echo Point in the Kasten house. Here is a picture of her sailing, taken about 1900. How would you like to wear a dress to sail? Anita married Walter Kasten on January 11, 1908. Anita and Walter had 3 children: Gertrude, also called Trudy, my mother, George, and Robert. Robert is Bill's father. Shortly thereafter, Walter Kasten built the home which now sits on the far northwest end of Echo Point for his wife and 3 children. It was the original site of George Heineman's cigar and booze tents. The center part was built first, the fieldstone part on the right second, and the porch on the left last. Anita Heineman Kasten died on January 11, 1931, her wedding anniversary. She was just shy of 48 years old. According to newspapers at the time, she died after a long illness. Unfortunately, Anita struggled with mental health issues and was in a sanitarium for many years. At the time of Anita's death, her daughter, my mother Trudy, was 23, George was 19, and Bill's father was 14. Auntie L. Heineman, who lived next door in Shorewood and on Echo Point, was the real mother that they never had for many years. On November 12, 1932, Trudy Kasten married my father, Everett Smith, who many of you probably knew as Eggy. His birth name was Everett Grunwald Smith, with the initials EGS, leading to the unique nickname. I was born on July 27, 1936, and grew up coming to Echo Point every summer. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my grandfather, Walter Kasten, whom we called Pom Pom, but I don't know why, gave Walter, my cousin, and me a little Shetland pony named Colonel. We would ride in the pony cart around Echo Point. I later found out that Colonel was blind in one eye and would only turn in one direction. Note that we've never been allowed to be alone in the pony cart except when a picture was taken. Daily life at the lake was wild and fun-filled. I sailed a cub boat. That is my cub boat, A51. If I didn't bail it every day, it would be at the bottom of the lake. I went to sailing school, just like the kids do now. Don Feilbach, who is, believe it or not, still alive, was a teacher for sailing school. On weekends, when we raced, I was usually way last, sometimes by so much that the judges had already gone home. When I was growing up, my mother always went to Milwaukee on Thursdays to have her hair done. As you can imagine, since Mom was not home, my friends and I would head down to the boathouse, climb upstairs, go over the railing, and jump into the lake from the top floor. The more adventurous ones would actually climb onto the roof and jump off. And it was actually allowed, but we used to water ski starting on the pier and ending on the pier, which sometimes there were a lot of slivers ending on the pier. The other thing that we liked to do was the slinger stock car races. We always had one person in the trunk because you were counted by the number of heads in the car to what you paid. And our stars were Fuzzy Fossbender and Miles the Mouse Melius. We always spent summers at the lake, where I met Tom Hauske. He was my cousin Walter Kasten's best friend. Tom and I were married in 1960 and have 4 children. My father loved to sail, but no Echo Point story would be complete without talking about his total lack of sailing ability. He was a very talented man in many ways, but he was a terrible sailor. His E-boat called Echo Point Senior was called Echo Point Senior. He almost always finished last and often tipped over. Sometimes they felt sorry for him and the judges would let him start at the 5-minute gun. But it seldom made any difference. Even though they tipped, Eggy would always end up on the top of the bottom of the boat. He was completely dry with his lucky strikes and matches. There he would be smoking on the bottom of the boat while he waited for someone to come and help him. Now this gets me back to the stone part of our house at the lake. We never went in the living room because my father's wet canvas sails were always laid out over all the furniture. They were just laying there, but they would be dry by the weekend. And yes, they smelled like a wet dog. Now, it's your turn, Billy.
So what a great turnout, and thank you all. Before we continue with the timeline that Anita set forth, I must share with you a little bit of humor about this shot right here. And that is that at one point, maybe when Eggy was in his late 70s or early 80s, somehow after many, many years of coaxing, he convinced Buddy Melgus to come sail with him for one race. Buddy would refuse to sail the boat for understandable reasons, but he did take the jib and obviously issue instructions to Eggy during the race. One of the interesting parts was Eggy never got to have a cigarette on the downwind leg, so he was a little too busy sailing the boat. At any rate, the reason that sort of one race that Eggy would win was such a popular subject on the lake was he promised the entire fleet that if they allowed him to win just one race, that he'd have a champagne celebration for the entire lake at his house. So despite that wonderful offer, that never happened. They never let him win. Go back to Buddy Melgus. Coming around the last buoy, Eggy's in first place. And the boat, I mean, there was excitement in the boat. So much excitement that he hit the buoy. And he had to go around, which allowed the second place boat to take the lead and hold it until the finish. So you can just imagine Buddy Melgus on the dock after the race. So anyway, so let's continue with the family items. In 1846, when he was just shy of 20 years old, Carl Friedrich Kasten arrived in New York City from Bremen, Germany. He made his way to Milwaukee, and in 1849 he married Johanna Krettel, and who was also born in Bremen. His first appearance in the city directories was in 1851, where he was listed as half of the firm of a firm called Meyer and Kasten. They were tobacco and cigar manufacturers located in Milwaukee, in the Third Ward, actually. So when Carl first filed his immigration papers in 1852, he gave his name as Charles F. Kasten, changing his name. Don't know why. Ultimately, Charles went into politics and became elected the clerk of Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors, and later he was the assessor for the city of Milwaukee. Charles and Johanna had 4 children, and when Charles died at the age of 47 in 1873, his children were between the ages of 12 and 17. Frederick Kasten was the oldest of that group, and at the time of his father's death, Frederick appears in the city directory as a messenger for the bank. Within a year after being a messenger of the bank, he advanced to the clerk's position at a bank that was now called the National Exchange Bank. Frederick slowly rose, but steadily, and rose steadily through the ranks of the bank in forthcoming years. As a young man, Frederick was also involved in what was referred to as the Turner movement, and you guys might remember Turner Hall. And so the Turnerism was basically a transplant from Germany that stressed a sound mind in a sound body, with particular emphasis on gymnastics. Frederick was a star in the local Turner halls. He also was one of 8 Milwaukeeans selected to travel to Frankfurt, Germany in 1884 to compete in an Olympics-style international tournament. And note that the modern Olympics did not start until 1896. But competing in a field of 12,000 athletes, the Milwaukee team took 6 of 20 first place finishes. So in effect, winning, the world at the time, gymnastics championships. So the team came back to Milwaukee, returned with a hero's welcome, complete with brass bands, a parade, and a celebration in Schlitz Park Beer Garden. In 1878, Fred married Jane Guy, the daughter of an English immigrant. They had 3 children, Alma, Walter, and Frederick. Frederick Sr. might have finished out his career at National Exchange Bank, but in middle age, he decided to take a little bit of a chance on a new enterprise. In 1892, Captain Frederick Pabst, you may recognize that name. We may be drinking some of his product tonight, but Frederick Pabst founded the Wisconsin National Bank, and Frederick Kasten, at the age of 37, became the bank's first cashier. By 1904, he was the second in command, and when Frederick died in 1913, Emil Walber, the Milwaukee's first German-born mayor, remembered him this way. He was a fine man and led a pure life. He was devoted to his family and had many friends. His death will be a great loss to the business circles. So although Frederick was really the progenitor of the Kasten line, it's also important to mention that he had 2 brothers, Charles and Oscar. Charles Kasten continued the craftsman tradition of the German forebears before him, and at the age of 14, he entered an apprenticeship with a Milwaukee engraving firm, learning a trade he would pursue for the rest of his life. In 1899, after working for jewelers and watchmakers in Milwaukee and Chicago, he formed a partnership with Hans Alsted and opened a jewelry store on Wisconsin Avenue and Milwaukee Street. Charles died in 1933, but the Schwanke Kasten Jewelry Company still remains today. Oscar Kasten was the baby of the brood. He was barely 12 when his father died, and there are some indications that the older brother, Frederick, helped raise him. Oscar followed Frederick into the banking business, beginning his career as a messenger for the First National Bank in 1881, and he stayed in banking until his retirement 53 years later. So Frederick, Charles, and Oscar were certainly success stories, but the family had not reached really its pinnacle of achievement Walter Kasten, Frederick and Jane's firstborn son, would rise to even greater heights in a field that was fast becoming the family tradition. Banking in 1898, In 1898, a few months before his 17th birthday, Walter went to work at his father's bank, Wisconsin National, beginning as a messenger for the sum of $20 a week. He rose rapidly in the organization, becoming a teller in 1902, a cashier in 1913, and vice president in 1914, a year after his father's death. And Anita, mentioned earlier, in 1908, Walter married Anita Heineman and joined the Heineman family at Echo Point. So during their summers, the women and the children would move out to Cedar Lake when school ended, and the men then would take the train and later automobiles from Milwaukee to the lake every weekend. So after their wedding in 1908, Walter and Anita moved to an elegant Georgian home at 2550 North Terrace Avenue that is still there today. Around 1915, they moved further north to 4408 North Lake Drive, and Walter ended up knowing his neighbors exceptionally well. Jane Guy Kasten and Anna Jenner Kasten, his mother and mother-in-law, respectively, lived on either side of this house. So, following the German custom, the children of the family referred to both women as Oma. The Kasten family actually developed a double connection with the Heineman family when in 1917, Walter's younger brother, Frederick, married Anita Heineman Graf. So the two Kasten brothers married the Heineman aunt and niece. So both of whom were named Anita. Frederick Kasten chose insurance as his career, working in partnership with Gustav Blatz, a member of the celebrated brewing family. He developed one of the largest property casualty insurance companies in Milwaukee. And after his death, Frederick C. Kasten, the son of and father of John and Cindy, joined the firm, and that's where he spent his career. Frederick C. Kasten, also known as Fevy, married Jane Rosenheimer, who grew up on Big Cedar Lake. As we know, John and Cindy are with us tonight. Cindy continues to reside at Echo Point in the family house. John, as many of you know, is founder of Kasten Marine. During World War I, Walter and Frederick made a weekly trek to join their families on Echo Point during the summer months. Even at the lake, Walter was a rather formal figure who was seldom seen without a coat and tie, but he made time for fishing and boating. By the time 1920s, according to historian John Gruda, conditions at Cedar Lake had become perhaps a little too crowded or congested, hard to imagine. But Walter and Anita decided to purchase another home farther north on Lake Owen near Hayward, Wisconsin. So that was also where Walter had spent some time with other leaders of businesses in Wisconsin, the Johnsons, Strattons, and all of them had homes on Lake Owen. The Lake Owen property remained in the family well after Walter's death and was sold in the mid-1960s to close friends of our family. The story of the train bell is quite interesting. So on many summer weekends, Walter Kasten entertained corporate boards at the house on Lake Owen. And to get there, they would attach the First Wisconsin Bank had two train cars. They would attach those two train cars to trains that were going up to Cable, Wisconsin. And they would typically leave about 9 p.m. on a Friday night. But prior to the departure, they would meet for drinks and dinner at the MAC and play cards and so on. At about 9 o'clock to the train station, up they go, and by 6 the next morning they were unhooked, and a Chris Craft would come get them and their luggage, take them to the house on Lake Owen, and then they would be off to golf and cards and fishing and other activities. So when they came back, it was kind of the opposite. The reverse was perfect. It was get on the train at Sunday night in Cable and come back to Milwaukee and be dropped off at 6 a.m. They'd probably rise at about 8, go back to the Milwaukee Athletic Club, have breakfast, shower, and go back to work. A bit of trivia on Lake Owen, and Walter Kasten was sort of known to have all the various board members or boards up to Lake Owen once a summer. Each weekend at Lake Owen, the menu and the agenda was identical week after week after week. So it was roast beef Saturday night, chicken on Sunday noon, and so on. Never a change. When the steam locomotive that took the banking group and his friends up to the North Woods, when that was retired, the railroad offered the train bell to Walter Kasten as a remembrance. This is a picture of a 3-year-old Anita, just to give you the size of the bell in perspective, with the bell at Lake Owen. And today the bell sits in a newly constructed pavilion that we put up a few years ago, right behind the white boathouse that you see on the left bottom there, that is on the lake. The bell obviously is a great symbolic history of what we have been, as a family, but also then we have plaques commemorating the families on Echo Point on the sides of the bell. So happy to have any of you look at that anytime you want. And now back to Echo Point. For various reasons, Albert Heinemann was not happy sharing Echo Point with his 3 sisters. And in about 1926, he decided to move to Door County. To make this happen, he needed to raise some money, so he wanted to sell his share of Echo Point. Due to the legal nature of an undivided ownership interest in the Heinemann family, the sisters had a difficult choice to make. They either had to buy their brother out at whatever price he demanded for his 1/5 of the land, no matter how unreasonable, or be forced to sell all of the land. So the sisters decided to buy him out. And as a result, after the transaction was completed, Walter Kasten never wanted this situation to ever happen again in the family, so he created what we now call Echo Point Realty Corporation. And Emma Juergens was the very first president of Echo Point Realty Corporation, and Echo Point Realty is still runs our family operation today. Banking, however, remained the primary focus of Walter's energies. He participated in several huge transactions, including the 1919 merger of Wisconsin National Bank and First National Bank. The merger created First Wisconsin Bank. At the same time, the bank shed a unit called Wisconsin Securities, which became the investment firm we now know today as Robert W. Baird. So note Robert W. Baird and Walter Kasten in this picture. First Wisconsin moved into the First Wisconsin's new 16-story structure at 735 North Water, and First Wisconsin Trust took over the Wisconsin National's former space in the Pabst Building. Since Walter Kasten played a leading role in merger negotiations, he became an executive vice president of the new bank, the equivalent of chief operating officer. He soon rose even higher. In 1924, Walter became the president of First Wisconsin and leading banker in the state of Wisconsin. At 43 years old, he was one of the youngest chief executives of a major bank in America. Note Walter's signatures on the bills here, and there's some more that are there. So that was before the Act of the 30s when we had a federal, so each bank issued their own currency until the Securities Act of the 30s. So Walter worked to grow the business, and by the end of 1928, the First Wisconsin had acquired 16 banks in Milwaukee. When the acquisitions were complete, Walter sat atop a Milwaukee financial empire that controlled more than 1/3 of the state's banking resources. The next step took Walter into far reaches of the state. In 1929, he established Wisconsin Bankshares Corporation to serve as the holding company for the 17 Milwaukee banks he had acquired, and also more outside of Milwaukee across the state of Wisconsin. While the holding company was a wonderful idea in theory, its timing could not have been worse. The stock market crash in 1929 ushered in the most challenging periods in the history of American banking, and the holding company stock, which was $11.50 in 1929, sank to just $6 a share a year later. Walter also suffered a personal loss during those times, and I mentioned earlier, on January 11, 1931, Walter's wife, Anita, passed away. He remained single until February 1945, when he married Elizabeth Elser Falk. World War II is widely credited with ending the Depression, and as the largest bank in a city that proclaimed itself the machine shop of the world, First Wisconsin Bank provided the financing for scores of manufacturers, turning Milwaukee into a giant of defense production during the war. Walter also served on many corporate boards, including Alice Chalmers, Carnation, Kimberly-Clark, A.O. Smith, Harnischweger, Chain Belt, Briggs & Stratton, Northwestern Mutual Life. Hard to believe he had any time in his day. But at the same time, besides that, he was also very patriotic and philanthropic. He participated in all 8 war bonds and ran most of them. And all 8 war bond drives were oversubscribed. He also headed the Red Cross campaign, just as he had during World War I. Further, he was involved in the Greater Milwaukee Committee, the Community Chest, Columbia Hospital, the Milwaukee Orchestral Association, now the Milwaukee Symphony, and the War Memorial, as well as Lawrence University. So whether he was approving loans or dispensing financial advice, Walter maintained a consistent demeanor, reserved, laconic, and thoroughly in control. Walter died of a heart attack on October 18th, 1950, at the age of 70. Circumstances were entirely typical. Walter slumped over while hosting a meeting of the Lawrence University Board in his office in downtown Milwaukee. His death earned banner headlines in the local papers, you can see. During more than a quarter century at the helm of First Wisconsin, he grew the bank's capitalization from $101 million to $570 million. The bank was among the top 30 banks in the United States at the time, and Walter himself became the undisputed head of the banking fraternity in both the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin. So here are a few family stories which we have enjoyed, and we're hoping you will too. We mentioned earlier a guy by the name of Emil Juergens, who was kind of a character. He was the husband of Emma Heinemann, shown here on their wedding day at Echo Point. Emil never learned to drive, so he would take the train from Milwaukee to Slinger every Friday afternoon. A chauffeur would meet him and then drove him over to Echo Point, where Emil entered the house, gave his wife a kiss, and promptly went upstairs to change into some more relaxed clothes. So while the other men vacationing at Cedar Lake wore their Point uniforms, which consisted of white short-sleeved shirts, white pants, and comfortable shoes, Emil always wore a suit, complete with a white hat and fancy white shoes. But after changing into his lake clothes, Emil headed straight to the bar at Timmer's, where he spent most all of his weekend. The only time that he was required back at Echo Point was for lunch on Sunday. There, Emil was well known to have a heavy scent of lilac cologne and was an expert at pinching the single ladies who happened to be guests at Echo Point that weekend. You all remember party lines, if you remember party lines on the telephone. For many years, there was only one phone on Echo Point, and it was originally located in Tilly Heinemann Groff's house. Tilly totally loved having that phone in her house because she could listen to everyone's conversations. But she soon tired of chasing after people on Echo Point to answer their calls and connect with them. As a result, the phone was moved from her house to a waterside shack where listening to the others' phone calls became quite a pastime for everyone. But this created other problems because many times no one was near the shack to answer the phone. So if someone was trying to call some resident of Echo Point, they would resort to instead calling the nearest neighbor, which was the Sprinkman family, and then they asked them to walk over to Echo Point and find the person to answer the phone. You can imagine that this arrangement did not last long. A favorite after-dinner table game for our family through multiple generations has been a game called Up Jenkins. It is played with a quarter and two teams opposing each other at a long table. And hopefully the teams consist of, at least four, and maybe, much better to have 10 or 12 on each side of a table. So one of the team members secretly hides the quarter, and the opposing team has to guess which one has the quarter and in which hand it is held. In order to confuse the guessing team, the team with the quarter performs various tasks and movements with their hands, including shouting with boisterous voices in an effort to hide the identity of the player holding the coin. So if you've got the coin in your hand, doing something up here, you're then putting it on the table and it'll make a noise unless you're making a lot of noise to mask that quarter hitting the table. So one thing that was great was if anybody's looking for more specifics on that, I was able to find that, yes, Google, in Google search you can find Up Jenkins. The other rather humorous, at least part of Up Jenkins, was I found myself at the Kennedy compound in Hyannis back when I was in my 20s, and all of a sudden Saturday night they all say, we're going to play Up Jenkins. And I said, what in the world? And they said, what, you know it? And I said, yeah, I do know it. So, that was great. They played Up Jenkins every Saturday night, which was really fun. Walter Kasten also was a founding member of this club. And in the summer of 1928, a group of 15 founders was organized by B.C. Ziegler. Many of those names were captains of West Bend industry, including Rolf Kiekäfer, Mauzan, Wentorf, Kielkopf, Groom, Gale, Frankenberg, Sprinkman, Lay, and Rosenheimer. The following summer, a new golf club held its grand opening. The date was June 21st, first day of summer, 1930. And the first foursome off the tee was B.C. Ziegler, Walter Kasten, Rudolph Hokanson, who was a very involved person in the city of Milwaukee, and a guy by the name of Billy 60, who at the time was the golf writer for the Milwaukee Journal newspaper, and also a multi-year amateur golf champion in the state of Wisconsin. So they were the first foursome. To conclude tonight's remarks, Anita and I would simply like to say thank you for joining us. As you have heard, Big Cedar Lake has been a vital part of the extended Heinemann, Juergens, Kasten families for many generations. Echo Point has been and always will be a place where family is of the utmost importance, where people can forget the pressures of the real world and relax with loved ones surrounded by the natural beauty of the lake. Where else can you get splinters from a wood pier? Or pinched fingers from a boat landing? Or swim in chilly waters in May or October? You can learn to sail, or tie a bowline knot, skate or ice boat on a frozen lake, watch young children catch their first fish, observe eagles in their natural habitat, marvel at a sunset over the lake, or even have your dog make friends with a skunk. Our family applauds the magnificent effort of CLCF to preserve our beautiful natural surroundings into the future. Its work is in large part what makes this area so memorable and so special, and it allows our family and other families to pass down the special gift of what Cedar Lake and the surrounding area has meant to all of us, and will mean to all of those who follow us. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you for supporting CLCF. Cheers.